Welcome back. Well, with two of his staunch allies, Britain's Tony Blair and Spain's José María Aznar, gone, George Bush can now count on two new partners, Nicolas Sarkozy and Angela Merkel. After the French president's visit, the German chancellor will be meeting George Bush at his Texas ranch on Friday and Saturday. Both countries disagreed with Washington over Iraq, and the US president could never mend fences with the German and French predecessors. At the same time, Britain's new Prime Minister, Gordon Brown, seems to be distancing himself from the Bush administration. Well, joining us again are our guests in Paris, Renaud Girard. He's the chief foreign affairs correspondent of Le Figaro newspaper. And in Washington, D.C., Raymond Tanter, professor of political science at Georgetown University and a former member of the U.S. National Security Council. Welcome back, gentlemen, to the second half of the program. Mr. Tanter, it seems to be a changing of the guard. I wonder, how will the likes of Russia and China maybe respond to the stronger alliances that the US has with France and Germany, as we remember, two nations that staunchly opposed the war on Iraq?
Well, first of all, Angela Merkel, the president of the Chancellor of Germany, is going to the Texas White House is a step in the right direction, sending a signal, if you will, to Russia and China that the train is taking off and they better come on board. One of the aspects of that train is to enforce new sanctions on the government of Iran of a multilateral type, either a European Union set of sanctions or the sanctions at the UN Security Council. Now, what happens is that Angela Merkel has not really focused that much on Iraq. Iraq, as I said before, is ongoing, its history, but Afghanistan and Iran and Pakistan are the key focal points of the agenda of the Merkel-Bush talks. I've had conversations with my former colleagues at the White House. They mentioned how the Sarkozy visit was so electrifying at the dinner, and that the Merkel visit following up will give the Germans, give Berlin an opportunity to get in on a trilateral entente among Germany, France,
you
and
mentioned,
the United
sorry
States.
to interrupt you, you mentioned Afghanistan. Sarkozy promised to continue support of the US with his French troops in Afghanistan. How important is that for the US?
It is huge for President Sarkozy to say that the French will stay the course, if you will, in Afghanistan. When Pakistan, it seems to be crumbling at its edges. Al-Qaeda is moving ahead in Iraq, Al-Qaeda of Mesopotamia. Al-Qaeda is in Waziristan, Pakistan. Musharraf of Pakistan is being challenged by some of the human rights figures, as well as Mrs. Bhutto, the former, the present opposition figure. The French-American alignment in Afghanistan keeps NATO together as a whole.
Renaud Girard, Nicolas Sarkozy said, I quote, NATO cannot be everywhere. The EU must be prepared to act. Now, he doesn't seem too happy with the current setup at the European Union, does he? Can he convince the US to support the stronger EU that he envisions?
Yes, I think that, even the American policy that didn't want to have, they want to see some kind of independent European force within NATO has changed. And, actually, de Gaulle withdrew from the military structure of NATO in '66 because he didn't want French soldiers to be under the command of American generals. He wanted to have really his say in this alliance and be able to have his own nuclear weapons and to do whatever he wants with the France forces. But now the main point is that you have crises, like maybe if you have a crisis in Macedonia tomorrow, or in Kosovo, whatever, where you can think that the Americans are not interested because, in the heart of Europe, and you need to have a European force within NATO able to act very quickly. I mean, in '92, the Brits and the French sent soldiers in Sarajevo, but the Americans refused to do so, and they waited 1995. So Europe now wants to have an independent European force that doesn't need American consent to be engaged on the ground. And I think that if they give that to Europe, France will agree to join again the military structure of NATO, because of course France is a part.
So you are saying that France could possibly join NATO under Sarkozy?
Yeah, military structure of NATO, because of course France is member of NATO, is a founder member of the alliance, but could join the military structure, could rejoin that. France withdrew from the military structure of NATO in '66, but France could join again the military structure of NATO if France gets this kind of independent European force within NATO, and of course if France gets the post of command that it will ask. I mean, France cannot accept that all the generals of NATO are Americans.
Raymond Tanter, what happens if or when a Democrat president wins the race next year and he or she turns out to be very unlike George Bush? Would Nicolas Sarkozy be in a bit of a fix for maybe putting all his eggs in one basket?
Absolutely not. John Kerry, who ran against George Bush, is thought of as too French. He's a Francophile. Mrs. Clinton, Senator Clinton, is very close to France. Barack Obama, very close ties with Sarkozy. So there's a bipartisan mood in America now that says that eventually Iraq will be over and it is time to fashion the future. And that future is going to be defined by a strong transatlantic alignment, not just against countries like Iran, the Iranian regime, but standing for the democratic values in Iraq, the democratic values being manifest in Afghanistan. And by the way, my colleague mentioned that Europe might have an independent military force within NATO. I think that a couple of years ago, this would have been thought of as unrealistic, because Europe was at that time an economic giant and a military pygmy or dwarf, if you will. Now Europe has a gross national product equal to that of the United States or slightly higher, and it is around the French and the British nuclear forces and conventional forces coming up to the point where it is thought of as not a military giant, but is doing much better. And the Iranian regime has to understand that Europe is not just an economic partner of Iran, but could exercise leverage against that regime with the fact that the European Union accounts for some 35% of the imports to the government of Iran. So I'm very optimistic that the transatlantic alliance is alive and well, and that the Sarkozy visit is a trump card, a triumph, if you will, for that alignment.
Mr. Girard, there's only about 30 seconds left on the program. Do you agree with Mr. Tanter that Sarkozy would be flexible and dynamic enough to change if the Democrats take control of the White House in terms of the presidency?
Yeah, I totally agree with that, and I think that it's good that Sarkozy has got like personal relationship with good personal relation with George Bush. You had very good personal relationship.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. You've got your agreement. Sorry to interrupt you. We've run out of time on the program. I'm awfully sorry. Renaud Girard and Raymond Tanter, thank you very much for joining us here on Inside Story. And thank you so much for joining us here on this edition of Inside Story. Bye-bye for now.